production for North Carolina? Do we need to switch do we need to move from coal to nuclear? Is solar going to be involved? And one of the areas I'm interested in is solar, and some of the companies in California that have solar productions, they actually print solar cells on a metal screen. So like you're printing a piece of paper, a newspaper. They'll print this stuff, and that's the type of company we would probably want to attract in North Carolina. So we take a look at the tax credits for attracting those types of companies to North Carolina. Us also as a bioengineer of crops, in other words, what practices in agriculture are going to be changing with climate change. Conservation rules, we review them, see what we can do for water conservation, energy conservation, things like that. Implementation, what regulation changes we've got to do. Land use in cities, land use in the countryside. Mass transit, obviously we need to cut energy, and the more mass transit we can do is probably going to be better, but again, that's going to be very costly. Education of the public. And how to communicate all this stuff? Well, outreach to schools, industrial organizations. Well, they're going to be a tough one because it's going to cost them a lot of money, they think. So we got to communicate to those, and the farmers, we've got to communicate to them also, because that's going to be a large group that's got to be concerned with climate change. Are you any questions? Yes.
You mentioned in your first reactions that it's sort of a long term. How do you keep interest in a project that you're talking multi-generations? How do you keep the energy up in this type of a thing for the long term?
I was thinking school outreach. You're going to, the kids be aware of it, everybody be aware of it, and just continue with that. And there's so many things published. There's websites that go one way, it's going to be the end of the world, and there's websites that it doesn't matter, it's not going to be anything. And the real answer is probably somewhere between. And so you just got to keep the public informed. What we know, what we're going to do about it.
Yeah, in follow-up to that, if we're able to develop some expertise locally and be seen as an objective voice of what the climate conditions are, to try to sort of even out the extremes and the arguments, I think that could put us in a useful position over time where people would look to our agency as one that has kind of a level-headed view of these things. That doesn't necessarily keep people active, but I think it keeps us relevant in the long term.
We ought to counter our little victories as well. Even if climate change is nothing, energy, changing our energy habits is important today, and we've got to show that that's something that when we make progress, we need to celebrate and make it something that's not just something that's 100 years from now, but this is something that's relevant for today.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Ron. And one other thing I want to mention, just because I have the microphone, I'm going to brag on Kelly a little more. You know, on the day of the bottle ban, she also did 2 flash mob events, one at NC State University, one at UNC. And if you're not familiar with that, a flash mob is where a whole big group of unrelated people show up at the same place and same time for one purpose, and they do one thing together. And it's organized online, usually through Facebook or one of those types. And what they did this time, for example, at NC State at 11:34, they all showed up at the Brickyard with a bottle of water, a whistle blew, and they froze. And they had, I would say, at least 150 students participating in this. And they all froze for 3 minutes. At the end of 3 minutes, another whistle blew. They unfroze, and they went and recycled their bottles. and they all yelled, "Recycle!" And it was really neat. It reached thousands of students who were milling. It was at lunchtime, so they were, milling through the brickyard. It created a lot of enthusiasm from the ones who got to participate, and not one of them will forget that. So it's kind of amazing that things, simple things, again, you can do to reach out to folks. Okay, I'm done bragging now. Let's move on to the swear group in back.
I'm David Jones from the zoo. That squares are not so square. You can't read that, so I'm going to just read from the notes. We all thought, obviously, it was a great idea that this particular objective was very important. We need it. It's very good for the state. Thoughts that came out, though, from reading through it were the tension between the need to buy and the need to manage. That what we may need to do, certainly in times like this, is decide whether we're really managing what we've already got. So there could be a lot of hang-up around the 1 million acre target. There's not much point buying, what was it, another 38% at the target if we actually can't manage it. So one of the discussions that probably needs to take place is how do you balance that out over, say, the next 5 to 10 years? One view would say, buy. Just get everything you can get that's important to get and worry about managing it all in 5 to 10 years' time. Recommendations. Obviously need a plan. Develop a plan of both acquisition and management. I know a lot of that's already going on. Look at a wider audience than just farmers, foresters and the military, which quoted there. Our guess is that there's a huge audience in the commercial world, in big business, in industry, in economic development recruiters who are more and more, thank goodness, using the argument that quality of life is the way that we're going to build the businesses we've already got and bring in new ones. So there's a much wider audience than perhaps we immediately realise. Look at the whole question of tax incentives for people when they die and when they're still alive. What can they do? Can we persuade the legislature to give more tax incentivisation, not just for land purchase, but also possibly for land management? At the moment we're not looking at potential of private funding for land management. It's happening a little bit with the land trust, but not with state government. We might want to look at that. The 100,000 foot soldier argument. There are 24 land trusts. They have at least 100,000 members. Most of our relationships are with the staff of those land trusts. And if we could get at the 100,000 people that are members of those land trusts, perhaps put some effort into taking 1,000 of those, 20 maybe from each land trust, that sort of thing, and really getting those people knowledgeable about what we do and where state government is headed in all the subjects that we're talking about, you might get a very powerful multiplier effect. In other words, what you're looking at is aiming at 100,000 volunteers, basically, that work through the land trusts. One thing I've often thought, I've been on the board, I think, of 3 land trusts, and one thing, and I know we haven't got the resources to do it right now, if every one of those land trusts had an additional lawyer, God help us, but if each one had an additional lawyer, because nearly all of them now have got many more landowners they're coming to them asking for help, and they're not coping. So one way of dealing with that other 38% acquisition, if that's the route we want to go, is actually looking at ways in which the land trusts can help us. They already are to an extent, but be more efficient in helping landowners to come on side, as it were, and get their land under conservation easements. Some of the recommendation and implementation are rather overlapping here. In times like this, we need to be flexible in the way we use our human resources. I mean, the folks who are looking at land purchase and land management, right now there is no money, or rather money is there that is being held back for obvious reasons right now. So, should we be flexible in the way that we use our human resources? If we can't go out and buy those other acres right now, are they the people that need to be attracting that 100,000 new